This is Brad Scott's portfolio now. It's my favourite portfolio in footy. Hello, Brad. Welcome.
Thanks, Gerard. Appreciate your time.
You didn't disappoint people yesterday by not changing the rules, did you?
Well, I think there's been a lot of change, hasn't there, over the last 2 years, and it's not just changing the rules in footy. It's footy is particularly in Victoria is not as we know it, and that's not just the elite level. That's community footy's just been decimated over the last 2 years. So we really feel that everyone's craving getting footy back to what we know and love, and I think it's really important that we consolidate the changes that have occurred over the last couple of years and try and get footy back to what people remember from 2019 and before.
Just out of curiosity, are there any active proposals for rule changes in front of the committee at the moment? Not
rule changes as such, but we did talk about some interpretations, and that's probably just bringing the umpire interpretations back to the way the rules were originally written. So as an example of that, a really simple one, which is time wasting, which seems like a pretty sort of frivolous thing to talk about, but when we're trying to get free-flowing footy and we want to get teams to move the ball on quickly, any coach will tell you that when they don't have the ball, the first weapon in defence is to delay the opposition playing the ball on. So, we want to tighten that up, and we showed the committee some examples yesterday of 2021 time delay tactics that won't be tolerated in 2022. So that's not a rule change, but that's just tightening up an existing rule and making sure everyone's aware of it. Just give us a snapshot of what that looks like, Brad. What sort of clips are you showing? Well, I think anyone, if you think about the way footy's played, if there's for example, a free kick paid for holding the ball at a stoppage and players are milling around the ball, quite often the player who's had the free kick paid against him will just sit over the top of the ball and not let the opposition player get access to the ball. So, we just won't tolerate that next year. It'll just be, if the player impedes the opposition player who's won the free kick, it'll be a 50-metre penalty. So, that's something that's just slipped over the last couple of years. It's a crackdown on the B-grade acting. Sometimes I think players are drawn to sort of the B-grade. Oh, what's going on here? We'll just hold the ball up for a little bit. Well, I mean, we see it in other sports too, particularly the rugby codes, where the delaying the playing of the ball is a coaching tactic, and all clubs talk about it. All clubs do it, and it's just probably time that we caught up with it and that the umpires were stricter on it, because it probably feeds into the umpire respect piece too, which we're talking a lot about. Players getting the ball back to the umpire rather than kicking the ball away. So those sort of things have crept into the game the last couple of years, and we're pretty keen to sharpen that up. Is the riddle of holding the ball in your thinking, Brad? Well, it's been a standing agenda item on every meeting I've been a part of for the last 20 years, Gerard, yes, where it relates to coaches in the AFL. And the real challenge with holding the ball is there are polar opposite views from coaches, clubs, players, fans, and we're just, again, we're looking really closely at how the rule is written, and the challenge for umpires is how do they define prior opportunity, and also how do they define, when the player's had prior opportunity and is tackled, to the letter of the law, they have to immediately dispose of the ball by hand or foot. Now, the definition of what's immediately, how long do we give players before they kick or handball the ball? So that's what's on the table at the moment. That's what was discussed with the competition committee, and Andrew Dillon and I have got the Adelaide Crows to go tomorrow, and we'll have completed all our club coaching GMs and footy consultation. So once we've completed that process, our aim is to try and give as much clarity as we can to clubs, players, umpires and fans as to how holding the ball is going to be interpreted in 2022, so that everyone knows. So our aim is to have that absolutely completed by the end of January. Is, when the conversations you've had with the 17 clubs so far and the Crows to go, is there a commonality that you hear from coaches and from GMs of footy as to what they would like out of your portfolio? Yeah, the common theme is clarity where possible, and ample notice. And I think that's absolutely fair and reasonable. I think most coaches have probably shifted over time to, sure, they'll have a view, but the most important thing for them is to have clarity as to the way the rules are going to be interpreted, and so they can train their players. And if there are going to be any changes and material changes that might impact their recruiting or, the types of players they want to get on their list, then they just want as much notice as possible. And, we totally agree with that. But given the last couple of years, some of the changes have happened pretty late, and we always reserve the right to make changes particularly where player safety is paramount. So, we'll take that on board and do our best to give as much clarity and as much notice as possible. And that's why we're fairly explicit in saying that there won't be any material change in 2022, but there will be some tweaks to the way the game's been interpreted by umpires.
So I guess in what wasn't done, is the AFL happy with how the medical sub worked, given that it was the 11th hour that it was introduced for 2021?
Yeah, the feedback from particularly club doctors and the AFL's medical team was that it took the pressure off the decision makers, particularly where it relates to diagnosing concussive type incidents, and that will always be our first priority, to make sure that the right process is followed where it relates to assessing a player who's injured. Whether the Medi-Sub is the ideal way to do that, we'll just keep monitoring it. But we certainly want a bigger sample size. We want to be able to analyse it, and we certainly don't want to make any knee-jerk changes to it and then have to change it again down the track. So under that theme, just 2022, consolidating what's already been done in the last couple of years by Steve Hocking and his team, we want a bigger sample size before we even contemplate further change.
What do you think the stand rule did for the game in 2021?
I think it created options, particularly for the ball carrier, but options also for coaches to look, how they were going to exploit it offensively, and probably created some challenges defensively, which was a big part of the reason for the rule. We felt over a pretty steady 15-year period that defence was pretty much winning in the battle against offence, and I think the stand rule tilted the scales back in favour of offence just slightly, given it certainly gave the ball carrier more of a 180-degree view, and all footy fans know that most teams employ some sort of team defence these days, and the first layer of defence is the man on the mark. So reducing the effectiveness of that man on the mark gave the offensive player more options. And we're not going to draw any conclusions from whether statistically or otherwise as to the impact of that rule until we have a bigger sample size. And that's the reason we want to keep it the same for 2022. Was
there a level of opposition from clubs to it? So it felt like there was a coordinated move from a couple against it publicly maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. Did you get a push from any clubs to have it removed?
Not really. No, we had some, as I said, we had some feedback. Some clubs, as an example, really like the rule. Others, it probably doesn't suit them in terms of the way they've played previously. But we're in the phase at the moment, as I said, of consolidation. So when we're pretty keen just to have a look at it over time, and there's been a lot of change, and we're keen to bed those down and consolidate them.
Philosophically, Brad, in the scale of what you might do in this portfolio, are you a conservative? Are you a leave the game alone? Are you a radical thinker? Are you a revolutionary? Where would you put yourself in the scale as you develop in this role?
Well, I wouldn't put myself in any camp. I mean, my portfolio is fairly vast, and it relates to things like talent pathway and the overall competition structure, and a lot of strategic processes in that portfolio. But as it relates to the game, I think that, and perhaps it's because of my pedigree as a former coach, I still think coaches will have the most impact on the way the game is played. And our challenge is just to stay agile and keep watching the game and make sure our overarching goal is to make sure that the game is as compelling as it possibly can be for fans, for players, for everyone involved. So, if the game looks fantastic and we don't think there's any change required, we'll leave it alone. But the minute we see some, detrimental aspects coming into the game, we'll look to adjust. So I wouldn't pigeonhole my team into any camp on that front.
Where does scoring sit in that? So scoring's used as the tension piece. And I did note in some of what was going on with the stand rule, it was explicit at the time that the stand rule wasn't about increasing scoring, and yet it's been hung for the fact that scoring didn't increase. So there's the public debate doesn't quite stack up, I don't think, in those moments. But in the philosophy of the AFL is experiencing a historic and long-term deterioration in scoring. Does that concern you?
It's something we watch. I wouldn't say it concerns me because I know full well that a lot of AFL coaches, want to score more. After all, the objective is to score more than your opposition. The challenge really comes after about, in my experience, about round 4, where all teams are trying to score more. But the problem is if some teams are scoring more, that's at the expense of another team who's getting scored against more. So coaches immediately go to mitigating that increase in scoring. And I think that's what, where the AFL's got to be really aware that coaches will always have the biggest say in how the game's played, and whether that's a really attacking style or whether it's a really defensive style. And our role is to make sure that if the game becomes overly congested, scoring just completely dries up, then we've got to look to make change and to mandate change, because we can't expect coaches to do it for us because their role is to win.
Listening to you yesterday, Brad, the work around the MRO and particularly head knocks is a work in progress at the moment. I'm interested when you sit now. So the approach yesterday was to choose incidents, from 2013 and look at evolution. When you sit around a table now contemplating what is acceptable and what's not, is it a football discussion? Is it a medical discussion? Is it a legal discussion? Or does it now tie in all of those areas?
Well, it used to be a football discussion, and now the reality is that all of those parties are involved. And, we need to consult the medical profession, and, I think everyone knows the direction that this is going, in that we want to make our game as safe as possible, not just for the elite players that we watch on TV, but everything we do at the elite level feeds down through community level, right down to grassroots juniors. So we need to make sure that we're setting the right example and are promoting our sport as, one that is a competitive contact sport, but it's as safe as it can possibly be. So those discussions now do involve other people, particularly the medical profession, in how we're going to adjudicate head-high contact. And I thought it was a really helpful process to take the committee through some incidents, and head-high incidents in particular, through 2013 and have a bit of a discussion about what we thought was acceptable as an industry 8 years ago, and is that acceptable today? And it was a unanimous no. So it just demonstrated shifting attitudes over time. And an example of that, for example, is the sliding rule. Players used to slide into contests all the time. We just very rarely see that anymore. And I think players adapt really quickly. And our challenge with head high is to make sure that we're as clear as we can possibly be, that if you choose to bump, and the bump's still a legal part of the game, but you can't bump someone in the head. And if you do, whether it's accidental or not, there's going to be a case to answer.
Do you think, so player behaviour has moved across 8 years, or no, so standards have moved. Do you need to move player behaviour over the next 8 years? Is that actually what penalties are about?
Yeah, we did have a discussion around penalties, and the Players Association have a representative on the competition committee, and they stress that when players are fined, they absolutely do see it as a penalty. But the reality is, I think clubs and probably fans see when players are fined that it's akin to getting off the charge. So, I think we're looking for a change in player behaviour and the best way to deter them from doing those things. And that is most likely a suspension. But we want all of our players playing. So what we want is a change of behaviour, and hopefully we don't have to suspend anyone. But if we don't get the change in behaviour that we want, then perhaps we do have to be a little bit more or a little harsher at match review.
Do you know the answer as to whether the pre-finals bye would return, or is that up for debate at the moment?
Well, that fits into Travis Auld and Marcus King's portfolio around fixturing, and they've got some challenges at the moment with uncertainty around particularly the Western Australian border situation. But yeah, look, I think at this stage, we would look to return to the pre-finals bye, but we think we'll finalise the fixture in the first week of December, so we'll be able to give you a definitive answer then.
Terrific. Thanks a lot for your time this morning, Brad, and we'll pick up our conversations as we go.
Look forward to it, Gerard. Thanks for your time.